on ESPN Radio.
The Max Kellerman Show on ESPN Radio, ESPN Plus, the ESPN app, and SiriusXM Channel 80, and on your smart speaker. I know Wildcard Weekend is coming up. Who's going to update the events in Washington first. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. The Max Kellerman Show is presented by Progressive Insurance. Guests join me on the Goodyear Hotline. Before we even get to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Let me say that I realize I'm doing this show against the backdrop of an attempted coup, an insurrection in the state capital, in the nation's capital. Insurrectionists, rioters got into the Capitol building, and you've seen images where, they're waving a Confederate flag. That's a flag of an army that fought against the United States of America. It represents treason and sedition and slavery. They fought for slavery. There were people wearing shirts that said 6MWE Camp Auschwitz, meaning 6 million was not enough, referring to the Holocaust. These are white supremacists, and they somehow gained access to the Capitol building. And what athletes have pointed out throughout the day is, well, why don't you listen to Russell Westbrook say what he feels, because this sentiment was echoed throughout sports by both African-American and white players and coaches. Here's Russell Westbrook.
To see if those roles were reversed, if those were African-Americans and black people, it would be totally different. Unfortunately, there's so much going on, and there's so many people losing their lives, whether it's through COVID and losing their family members. And sometimes we can't control civilians and what they do. Just control what we do to make change in our society. And that's the biggest thing that we can do now. Unfortunately, we can't control what people do, how they move, but we can control our own actions and figure out how to make the world a better place. It's just crazy, almost like a movie when I see it talking to people, and obviously now being in D.C. and my family there, it definitely hits a little different for me now.
Right, and you hear that from people who live and work in that area. Dominique Foxworth on First Take both yesterday and today talked about how he walked through these mobs of people. And this was yesterday before the insurrection. The reality is, many have pointed out that many athletes and others have pointed out that were it mainly African-American people storming a Capitol building, and the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., the outcome would have been much different. In fact, Joe Scarborough, who was before he became a TV personality, was a Republican congressman, said, "We all know that if they were African-American, they would have been shot in the face," was the quote. This country has always had a very high threshold, very high tolerance for dead black people, and that's been the case since the inception of this country, which was founded on the original sin of slavery through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and up to the present day. There have always been forces, white supremacist forces in this country, and they've rallied around different causes, whether it's states' rights or some imagined grievance like election fraud that didn't occur. I mean, the only fraud that was attempted was by the party who lost. 127 representatives, including senators, voted to not certify the election. They're sore losers. If black people vote, we don't want to recognize it. And now that you can't do that legally anymore, they're trying other legal and illegal methods, extra legal methods, to make sure that black voices are not heard and not represented in our putative democracy, which is already slanted away from urban areas, and we know what urban is code for. For example, Democrats won something like 40-something million more votes than Republicans in the House and Senate to get a tiny little majority of seats. But beyond that, what we saw happening was the president, was Trump, calling for the date, January 6th, and directing the mob toward the Capitol building. And then they did what he asked them to do. And insofar as our politics represent the racial divide, which clearly they have in a stark way in the last 4 years with this administration, we see that white people have a long way to go. Chris Rock is the first I remember talking about this, saying people talk about all the progress black people have made. No, white people have made the progress. Black people just want to be treated with the same respect that white people are treated with, and obviously we're still not there yet. But as Dr. Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Dominique Foxworth of ESPN was kind of pushing back against that, not that idea, but was really more vocal about the idea that justice postponed is justice denied. And for those who feel, especially black people today, who feel, we hear a lot of well-intentioned white people saying, hey, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. In other words, progress is being made. We're not trying to hear it. Justice postponed is justice denied. I agree. It's not okay what's happening. But it is okay to both point out that progress is being made. In other words, when the Confederate flag is inside the state capitol, that's largely a symbolic victory for a moment for the person who got it in there, who smuggled it in there. But the fact is that largely that's a reaction to, and this moment in our history is a reaction to the browning of America. I've known since I was, in the third grade reading the Weekly Reader and PS 41 that the day was going to come where white people ceased to be the majority of the country, over 50%, and would be only the plurality, meaning still the largest population of any ethnic population, but not over 50%. And right now, we're not there yet in this country. That's going to happen, according to estimates, another 35 years or so. But we are right now undergoing the very moment at which babies being born white people are, if they are still in the majority, it's very, very slight. It's very close. They're slipping right now as we speak into plurality, meaning no longer over 50% of the population. And the question always was, when this moment came, how would people react? And what we see is the white supremacist kind of impulses and organizations even still extant in the country have these very powerful revanchist feelings, meaning they want to take back what they feel they've lost through civil rights and try to kind of hold on to what they've had until now. It's very difficult for people to tell basketball players, for example, to shut up and dribble at this moment when, as Stacey Abrams, who helped get Warnock, who is now the senator-elect in Georgia, a black man in the Deep South, Ossoff, a Jewish man in the Deep South. They both won their special elections. But Warnock was running against Kelly Loeffler, who was never elected. She was appointed, but she was senator. She was the incumbent who Warnock was running against. And Loeffler came out against Black Lives Matter. And the WNBA players on her team on the Atlanta Storm, and the WNBA players, by the way, have been right up front, at the forefront of the kind of athletes' social consciousness movement of this era and of this moment, started wearing T-shirts saying, vote Warnock. In other words, vote for the opponent of the owner of this team. Tough to tell athletes to shut up and dribble now, isn't it? When WNBA players say, wait, the person who owns this team is opposing Black Lives Matter? Well, what's that all about? Well, what is it about? Black lives don't seem to matter. Black people are mistreated. By the way, Colin Kaepernick was speaking specifically of law enforcement interactions with communities of color, but more broadly about social justice and racial injustice when he knelt before the flag, which is, it's an optional ceremony, right? It's not mandatory that you stand. And many would argue, including me, that's the most American thing you can do. The greatness of America is you have freedom of speech. You don't have to stand for the flag. And America was founded on protest, and protest continues in an attempt to make this country a better place. Peaceful protest. That's not what we saw yesterday. And think of the kind of purple-faced reaction, the anger and rage expressed by many white people at Colin Kaepernick's merely peacefully kneeling, which is a sign of respect, incidentally. That came about because Nate Solder said, who also played in the NFL and was in the military, met with Kaepernick and said, I feel bad when you don't stand for the flag when you're just sitting. Is there something we can do to show that you're showing respect even though you're protesting? And Kaepernick said yes, and they came up with this solution where he kneels. And a lot of these same people from yesterday were so outraged that Kaepernick did that. Now I would expect people of goodwill, and I'm talking especially to white people who don't get this, to be way more outraged that there was a violent attempt at a coup of the United States government to overturn a lawful election. This is Doc Rivers talking about what happened yesterday.
As an older black male, I've seen police dogs being unleashed on people, and then you see the day where there's nothing. And so that's an emotion that I have, right? Tobias and those guys probably don't have that emotion. So, and I don't know how many guys even watching TV today. you just don't know, but it's going to be the talk for both teams. Washington, just think about them. It's where they live right now. So they have a lot on their plate, probably worried about public safety of their families. So this is a tough one tonight, I got to tell you.
When I talk about, they're not going to shut up and dribble anymore. Not that they have been, but that very idea is ludicrous. I mentioned Stacey Abrams, who helped get Warnock elected and has an amazing story. And she said recently on social media, she referenced the fact that she is the great-great-great-granddaughter of slaves, the great-great-granddaughter of sharecroppers, the great-granddaughter, etc. And you saw the progress in every generation, but still until very recently, her family wasn't allowed to send their kids to the schools in which the family worked, right? And eventually it led to her, who is a powerhouse in American politics and a force for good. And she talked about the responsibility that she feels, Stacey Abrams feels, the way she put it, she said, creating space for people to show that they can, that is for them, that their options are limitless, not limited. And NBA players and WNBA players and athletes, led by African-American athletes, but also joined by their white allies, have, I think, done a very good job of setting an example that shows that everyone is welcome. Everyone is welcome in the multiracial coalition of goodwill. That's the America that we'd like to see, the multiracial coalition of goodwill. And, unfortunately, not everyone in the country right now are good faith actors. But look, so I'm aware that all that stuff is going on, and yet this is a sports network. You've tuned into a sports show, and I am also aware that many want to. You can find this news all over the dial, on online, social media, on television, everywhere you go, your friends, family, and sometimes you want an escape from the kind of awful news of the day. Although, lastly, I'll say this. The reality is, just as the Tea Party was a reaction to Barack Obama, a man of color who was president of the United States of America, keep in mind Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, is a woman of color. And the fact is, even the law enforcement reaction and kind of acquiescence, the rolling over to the insurrectionists, it remains to be determined, because one officer seemed to open the gates for the rioters. Another was taking selfies with the rioters. And again, some of them wearing white supremacist T-shirts and sweatshirts. Part of that is a reflection of the current administration and the cooperation in terms of how they want to use law enforcement and decisions that are made. And there is a new administration set on January 20th to take over, with a woman of color as vice president, incidentally, or not incidentally, and maybe change and progress, which is not linear. It's not always perfectly smooth, always ascending to greater and greater justice. It's choppy. It's up and down. But maybe some of those attitudes of law enforcement, rather than their worst impulses be kind of encouraged and enabled, some of their better impulses will be encouraged and enabled. And finally, I'll say, it's not like the evil of white supremacy, once conquered in a generation, is now dead and gone forever. No, it lays dormant, and the history of humanity has been in every generation. We have to be vigilant, and good people need to resist the temptations of the weaknesses of the human spirit as represented by the rioters and insurrectionists in the Capitol yesterday. Okay. I am now going to start talking about sports, on-the-field sports. It's not an easy kind of term. It's a hard turn, but nevertheless, it must be done. There's a job to do, so we're going to get into NFL Wildcard Weekend. The Ravens and the Titans. And Lamar Jackson, by the way, speaking of race, it is interesting, and I suppose what you can say is what I just told you was straight talk wireless, no contract, no compromise.
This matchup between Baltimore and Tennessee, if you like explosive playmaking down the field, physical play in the trenches, it's got everything.
We have to find a way to win one game. Vrabel made it clear that is the only objective.
So, look, Lamar Jackson needs this one. There's no doubt about it. And what I was going to say is to kind of tie it into the previous subject. Once upon a time, the kind of responsibility felt by African-American quarterbacks was, you have to show, because there's so many barriers to ever becoming a quarterback in the NFL if you're African-American. Warren Moon had to go play in Canada for a while, for years, before he could actually try to make him a receiver, before he could become a quarterback. And he was a great quarterback for many years in the NFL, record-setting guy. But so like all this kind of responsibility to show African-American men can lead and can play the position, that's not there anymore. If you look at the best quarterbacks in football, who's the best? Patrick Mahomes. And among the best are Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson. So there's not that same kind of pressure on Lamar Jackson. Although I will say that there is the kind of vestigial or kind of remaining sense that a running quarterback, a quarterback known more for running than throwing the ball, which is how black quarterbacks were kind of stereotyped for many years, can't really be the guy you want. And it's interesting because how much of that is real? After all, throwing the ball is more effective than running it. That's why, and the rules favor it, the fans like it more, and it's a more effective offensive weapon. That's why you see increasingly the vertical passing game through the years is, more and more used. But, part of it is that, and part of it does still have those kind of racial undertones or overtones. I don't know if it's going under and over. I know they're tones of some kind. But anyway, but part of it is just the reality that you are probably going to have to be a pretty accurate passer, or at least a guy who can beat you from the pocket, in order to be an all-time great, in order to be a Super Bowl champion, or a guy who competes year in and year out for Super Bowls. And there's a lot on Lamar because he is so fast, and that's a devastating weapon. I'll say, though, that his passing, though maybe it took the trajectory wasn't as kind of continuous as it had been the previous couple years, where he starts out at age 21, and very accurate passer for his age in the NFL, and then improves the next year, and then maybe takes a little bit of a step back, right? Isn't where maybe that trajectory would suggest he would be by now. I don't really think it's an issue of can Lamar Jackson pass the ball accurately enough, because I've seen him do that enough times against good teams and defenses who will take away the run. I think the question is, can Lamar Jackson win under the brightest possible lights, under the most pressure? He has not yet beaten the Chiefs in the regular season. You got to do that if you want to get out of the AFC. He has not yet beaten the Ben Roethlisberger Steelers. He's only played them once, and he lost. And he hasn't won in the playoffs, lost 2 games. Now, the encouraging thing is the first year in the playoffs, he looked completely out of his depth. He's a very young quarterback, and and he looked terrible in the first half, like he didn't belong. By the second half, he had gotten much better, still not good enough. In his second playoff appearance against the Titans last year, he put up some big numbers. He still made some mistakes. He wasn't his normal top-level self, but he was much, much better than he'd been in his first playoff game. Can he be better than that? He's going to have to be better than that against a team that seems to have his number. Beat him last year in the playoffs, beat him earlier this year, and is favored. Sorry, well, they're not favored, but they're considered the underdogs with the best chance to beat him again. And it's at Tennessee. There is enormous pressure on Lamar to win this game. Coming up, everyone's focused on Josh Allen, but is there someone we're forgetting about in this Bills versus Colts matchup? The best teams start with great talent. On Channel 80 and on your smart speaker. Bears are the biggest underdog of the weekend. They got a shot. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. By the way, I mean, like, we're heading into the NFL playoffs, but you see the Phoenix Suns? You know, sometimes you see a team on paper before the season starts, or even what they did the previous season, and you have high expectations, and then they come out and meet it right away. That's going to be a problem. Phoenix is going to be a problem. Dallas is going to be a problem in the NBA. Some teams on the rise. We're going to get into it. Not a lot today, but a lot going forward. We're going to get into it a little bit today. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. The Max Kellerman Show is presented by Progressive Insurance. Guests join me on the Goodyear Hotline.
And you saw what Josh Allen did even in that environment.
Josh Allen has been lights out all season.
They are dangerous.
They don't want to let up.
And in large part because the quarterback is just that physically talented.
Yeah, all the focus has been on Josh Allen going into that game. The quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, who now own the AFC East. And the Dolphins are a good team, and the Patriots look out for them next year. But Buffalo right now owns the AFC East. And by the way, going forward, who would you bet on next year? Buffalo has a stud quarterback, I think top 5 in the game. 1 Mahomes, 2 Rodgers, 3 Wilson, 4 Watson. And you can maybe even reverse that. We'll see. And 5 Josh Allen. He's going to have some comp next year from Justin Herbert too. But Josh Allen is a stud. And every year he got better, right? He started out about a touchdown to an interception. And for a team that didn't win a lot, and then it was 2 touchdowns to 1 interception. For a team that was winning more, and now it's 3 touchdowns per interception to a team that won a whole lot. And so the focus is on Josh Allen, an ascending superstar. Certainly a star, but can he be a superstar? Can he be, on that? Look, Mahomes is a tough level for anyone ever to reach. Really, I only think Aaron Rodgers ever did it. But can he be Deshaun Watson? Can he be in that can he be in the argument for best quarterback in the game, not named Patrick Mahomes, going forward? Right, because Rodgers is older. There's a lot of focus on Josh Allen for good reason. What about Phillip Rivers? A lot of the story of this game is Phillip Rivers. Frank Reich was really rewarded because he had that. He was, really supported Phillip Rivers after a slow start. And guess what? They're in the AFC playoffs, and they're a good team. These are on paper, it's an evenly matched team, right? Maybe Indianapolis is a little bit better against the run. But they both give up around the same number of yards, around the same number of points. Indy's a tick above them on the list. Their defenses are comparable. They both have some weapons on offense. Who has the better quarterback? I mean, everyone says Josh Allen right now, right? But think of what's on the line for Phillip Rivers in this game. He came out in a draft class, just like, you group certain guys together. So Goff and Wentz and Dak, same draft class, right? Think of how Trubisky gets killed because of Mahomes and Watson, right? Well, he came out, Phillip Rivers did, with Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger. In fact, Roethlisberger was picked 9th or 10th. Rivers went 4th and was traded to the Giants. Eli wound up obviously on the Giants because he refused to go to San Diego. But it was Rivers, and I want to say Nate Kading and Sean Merriman maybe was the deal. But they were traded for each other, Rivers and Eli. And Rivers went ahead of Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger's won 2 Super Bowls. Eli's won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Rivers put up big numbers under Norv Turner, an offense that helps you out that way. Much simpler offense than the one that Eli had to run, for example. But Rivers putting up numbers every year. Tough as nails. The Iron Man streak. He and Eli were competing with that for years. Team leader. Family man, all that stuff. You hate to see him end his career as the only one of those 3 who never won a Super Bowl. But the fact of the matter is, I thought he had some good chances in recent years, and he's underperformed in the playoffs. Again, like when it's mattered most. I thought he looked like a deer in headlights against Belichick's defense a couple years ago when they had to go to Foxborough. And I really thought, back then the San Diego Chargers, I really thought that the Chargers had a real chance to win that game. They didn't. Rivers was out of his depth. This is a guy who's been to an AFC championship game, but never to a Super Bowl, and obviously has never won one. Well, you can't start that journey without beating Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. And because these are apparently evenly matched teams, if Rivers and the Colts lose, people will look at the quarterback position. One team had a superstar, and the other guy had a faded older guy. There's a lot of pressure on Phillip Rivers in this game. A lot. Ronald in Florida, you're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio.
Yes, sir, Max. I'm going to make it really quick, dude. I've been listening to you for a long time. I'm a big-time boxing fan. I just want to thank you, dude. You are truly a champion for justice. I remember back in the George Floyd thing and all of that, you were still talking this. Thank you, Max Kellerman. You are truly a champion for justice.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think it's disgraceful that black people are in the position where they have to thank, allies who are white in the media for telling you the truth and for standing on the side of righteousness. You should never have to be in that position, but as long as you are, I will speak the truth. Eli in Maryland, you're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio.
Hey, just calling to see, do you think Washington has a chance to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Saturday?
Not a good one. Not a good one. Tampa is peaking at the right time. And let's not forget, Washington was a little bit lucky to beat the Eagles. The Eagles, who were capable of upsetting teams, like they upset the Saints when the Saints were on a roll. But let's keep in mind that Washington, playing in disarray at the quarterback position, an injured old guy and a young guy who they let go, right, on the last game of the season where they're fighting for their playoff lives, and the Eagles are resting guys. Look at the injury report before the game. It's ridiculous. They were still lucky to win. It took going for it on 4th down instead of kicking a chip shot field goal, which would have tied the game, and then Doug Peterson yanking Jalen Hurts from the game in order for Washington to squeak by the skin of their teeth. Now that team is going into a game against Tampa that's been routing teams. And also, like, other good teams have played the teams that Tampa's routed recently and not done as well. Again, they've beaten them, but not done as well against the Falcons, for example. It would be the reason I think when you talk about, like, who's facing the most pressure, not throughout the playoffs. I think Mahomes is under the most pressure to win the Super Bowl because he's expected to. I think Rodgers is facing pressure because, look, they drafted his replacement. How many more shots is he going to get at this thing? Lamar Jackson has never won a playoff game. But Tom Brady, I know he's the GOAT and everything. Of course, his legacy is secure and all that. But was it more Belichick or was it more Brady? Well, if you get bumped in the first round by a sub-500 team in disarray when you are loaded for bear, that's a bad look. That ain't exactly Joe Montana taking the Chiefs to the AFC Championship game once he left the Niners, that's where my head is with all of that. I think that Washington has a good defense, but not enough to overcome a very potent Bucs team right now, especially with Brady having this much to play for. The Max Kellerman Show on ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. At Progressive, they're making things even easier. They'll help you bundle your home and car insurance together so you can save on both. Learn more at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. By the way, Lindor to the Mets. Guy can pick it. For a dude who hits 30-plus home runs, he can pick it at short. It's a big move for the Mets. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Speaker. Think the Bears could pull off a double-digit upset? You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. NFL playoffs kick off this weekend, of course, and we've got Ravens-Titans, and that is a good one. A lot on the line. This Sunday at 1:05 p.m. Eastern on ABC, ESPN, and ESPN Deportes, and the ESPN Megacast broadcast, which is awesome, continues on ESPN2, ESPN Plus, and Freeform. Chicago Bears, biggest underdogs of this weekend. They're getting 10 points. Give them a chance against the Saints? Do you? Let me tell you why the answer is yes. I think the Bears have a chance. Now, I like the Saints. And in fact, had the Saints wound up with a better record than the Packers, maybe I'd even take the Saints to get out of the NFC. The reason I don't like them out of the NFC right now is if they have to go to the frozen tundra, a team that plays better in the dome anyway, even then in some like warm weather city, let alone going to the Packers, that's tough, and especially playing Aaron Rodgers the way he's playing right now, with a surging Packers defense actually, very tough. So the Saints should, of course, beat the Bears. That's why they're favored. But can the Bears win? Here's the thing. Did you see the way Trubisky took his benching as opposed to, say, Carson Wentz, big crybaby about it, and then undermines the team by, like, leaking to the media? Like, every time Jalen Hurts takes the ball, I'm very unhappy. I want to be traded. I have to consider whether I want to stay. It's like, Carson Wentz, please. You're awful. What do you mean? It's not your decision. Your contract's untradeable. Trubisky just said all the right things, supported Nick Foles at the time, even when he may have been a better choice because he's more mobile behind the offensive line, which was porous. Trubisky took it like a professional, stayed ready, and then stepped forward and played good football after that. And do you think a team is more or less likely to follow him? So that's one reason. And the other, that the Bears have a chance. In a full contact sport, which is still a lot about trench warfare, right? Up on the line of scrimmage. Who wants it more? All those terrible sports cliches that really don't usually apply to other sports like baseball and basketball apply in the NFL. When you're physically confronting a guy in a full contact sport, the who wants it more absolutely makes a difference. Not like in baseball, a guy goes into a slump, he has to relax sometimes. Don't try too hard. It makes it worse. In football, you try harder, you usually do better. So leadership makes a difference. If who can tap into those kind of reserves of adrenaline in their teammates and make them believe, and who functions as a unit better and believes in each other more. It absolutely makes a difference. And the other thing is, I'm not saying the Saints don't have that with Brees. They do. But I think the Bears also have that with Trubisky because of the way he handled the situation. And the other thing is, the Bears have so much talent on defense. Like, the Saints are a really good defense, and they played well for stretches this year, and at one point looked like the best defense in the NFL. But even at the Saints' best, I never looked at them and thought, yeah, they have more talent than the Bears. Adam in Pennsylvania. You're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio.
Hello. I just want to say something about the Bears-Saints game on Sunday. I do think the Saints will win the game, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout because it seems like every time I see the Saints in the playoffs, they always play down to their competition. I mean, last year they lost to the Vikings, and it seems like every time they have a good record heading into the playoffs, they never play their very best. I still think they're going to win.
Well, let me answer that. But not in a tough game. Yeah, I get that. Thing about the Saints is they're a bit snake bit. They're the victims of no excuses, but been the victims of some bad calls at inopportune times, high leverage moments. Drew Brees has looked worn down at the end of seasons. He's old, but he did have arrest from football activities on field gameplay because of the fractured ribs and punctured lung. If there's a silver lining to recovering from that, it's that maybe you'll have a little more gas left in the tank for this playoff run if they go on one, or at least for the first game against the Bears. The other thing is Rivers has a number 2 receiver in Emmanuel Sanders, and he should have his full complement of offensive weapons for one of the few times this season. Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Alvin Kamara, everybody. So I hear what you're saying. I agree. I don't see it as a blowout, but for the reasons, some of them that you pointed out, I think it can be a good game. What does the football scientist have to say about Wildcard Weekend? That's coming up in a minute. Jackson in Texas, you're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio.
Oh,
Jackson,
hey,
you got 20 seconds.
Thanks for having me. I absolutely think the Bears have an excellent chance to upset the Saints this weekend. We all talk about Devonta Adams, how he is the best receiver in the NFC, best receiver in easily the NFC North, but we forget that Mitch Trubisky.
We got 5 seconds, dude. All right, he couldn't get it out. The Max Kellerman Show on ESPN Radio, ESPN Plus, the ESPN app, Sirius XM Channel 80, and on your smart speaker. Got the football scientist coming up in a few minutes. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Give me your upset of Wildcard Weekend, 888-SAY-ESPN. The Max Kellerman Show is presented by Progressive Insurance. Guests join me on the Goodyear Hotline. Look, the world is shocked over the events in Washington, D.C. yesterday, where insurrectionists rioted in the nation's capital and gained access to the Capitol building. The man photographed sitting in Nancy Pelosi's chair, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, third in line for the presidency. Should anything happen to the president or vice president? That's a kind of a serious office, right? The man who was photographed having kind of ransacked the office and sat in the chair is a self-described white nationalist, according to the Washington Post. There were others who put themselves on social media, one of them wearing a shirt that said 6MWE, meaning 6 million wasn't enough, meaning Jews killed in the Holocaust. Yet another man had a sweatshirt that said Camp Auschwitz. These are people rotten to the core, the worst among us, real degenerates who somehow gained access to the Capitol building, and the bad guys, and about which we all must agree. There's no dissent about that among righteous people. White supremacists are the bad guys. How were they able to get in the building? If those were African-American rioters, do you think they would be alive to get in the building? If there were thousands of them, how many do you think survive? And how many would be locked up? Would there be any who weren't either dead or in jail? Because almost no one was arrested. There were reports between 12 and 50 arrests out of thousands of people. One person, 4 people dead, 1 of gunshot wounds. If the entire sports world is reacting to this, as most of the world is, in shock, but also and disgust at the attempted overthrow of a democratic election, a rejection of democracy by fascists. How else do you put it? And one thing that you keep hearing throughout the sporting landscape are African American and white players and coaches making the point that were it black people storming the nation's Capitol building, they would never have gained access to it because they would have been shot dead and or arrested and imprisoned. Doc Rivers, 76ers head coach now, of course, at the pregame presser discussing the civil unrest.
As an older black male, I've seen police dogs being unleashed on people, and then you see the day where there's nothing. And so that's an emotion that I have, right? Tobias and those guys probably don't have that emotion. So, you know, and I don't know how many guys even watching TV today. You know, you just don't know, but you know it's going to be the talk for both teams. You know, Washington, just think about them. It's where they live right now. So they have a lot on their plate, probably worried about public safety of their families. So this is a tough one tonight, I got to tell you.
Look, Doc Rivers, you know, makes the same point I just told you everyone's making, and but goes further into it, how he's old enough to remember police dogs sicked on peaceful black protesters. But look what happened here. By the way, how much of that is because there was an unredacted FBI report late last year, late in 2020, I think it was from September, which discussed the threat of white supremacists' infiltration into levels of law enforcement. So how much of it is that? There was video of police, of law enforcement apparently letting the rioters in. Another took a selfie with one of the insurrectionists. And how much of it is the White House not cooperating in terms of keeping the peace, or actually aiding and abetting the rioters and the insurrectionists? Trump, after all, called the date January 6th, said there's going to be a problem, and then directed the mob toward the Capitol building. So I would suggest that I'm not going to do this whole show or segment about this. We do have sports to talk. But I would suggest that there's plenty of photographic evidence of the people involved, because they are so stupid they don't wear masks during a pandemic. And the FBI should gather all the information, if not during the however much longer the Trump administration lasts, because there are calls among many in government and in civil society for his removal by the 25th Amendment or by impeachment from Congress. But for however long it lasts, okay. If they won't do anything, then maybe the incoming administration will take the handcuffs off law enforcement, or the best elements in law enforcement, and prosecute the criminals, the debased criminals, to the full extent of the law. I've heard comments on social media from people saying, look, as a black person, I don't want, we'd have been shot, that's true. And I'm not asking for these people to be shot. I'm asking for no one to be shot, for arrests to be made for the unlawful, and unless they pose a deadly threat, for no one to be shot. And this is, Stephen A. and I talk about this on First Take a bunch, as it relates even to the process in Philly with Sam Hinkie. Stephen A.'s point is frequently that a black GM would never be allowed to get away with that. A white GM gets the tank for years. And he's pointing out white privilege. And my response to that is always, look, I ain't giving up any privilege. What I will insist upon is that all Americans are so privileged. In other words, if the privilege is being treated with respect as a human being and allowed to do your job to the best of your ability, for example, then I will insist that my fellow Americans are treated the same, no matter if they are black or white, young or old, male or female, whatever their orientation. Insist that everyone is so privileged. There's a long way to go. Football scientist coming up in a few minutes. I really want to get into, maybe I'll do it a little later in the show because I don't have enough time before Casey Joyner. I want to get into this, to the Suns and the Mavs, man. They're two of I think, the most interesting teams in the Western Conference this year. They're big threats to the Lakers, in fact. I don't think the Lakers are going all the way, but they're threats in the West. And the Mavs have a big game with the Nuggets coming up tonight. I want to get into that, but Casey Joyner joins me now, the football scientist, on the Goodyear Hotline. Casey, are you there? Casey?
I am here.
Heard a lot of cheering. Where's Casey Joyner? Oh, there he is. There he is. So, KC, boy, I quote you all over the place on this shootout thing. You were talking about. By the way, given the times in which we are living and what happened yesterday in the Capitol, let me be very clear. I mean on the NFL field. Shootouts meaning high-scoring games that feature a lot of vertical passing, right? But those kind of games, you've been saying those the Chiefs, for example, don't want to have those kind of games. That's why they rely on the run, because they're susceptible to losing those kind of games. Not that they don't win them more often than they lose them, but they almost never win other kinds of games, but they do sometimes lose those kind of games. Heading into the playoffs, what can we expect from Kansas City and other kind of high-scoring offenses? Are they looking for shootouts, or do they want lower-scoring games in the playoffs?
I think that this year it might be a little bit different, because I did a study of the 14 teams in the playoffs and said, how often are they winning? I'm actually starting to call them track meets rather than shootouts. So saying, how many times are you winning a track meet? These teams combined win 71% of their track meets. 71% of them. It's to put that in perspective. I did a study a few years ago.
So, KC, why are you giving me bum information? I've been running around saying you don't want a track meet. Now you're telling me you do?
I think it's a 2020 thing. I think a lot of it has to do with, because you don't have, I think a big part of it is you don't have crowds. You don't have these noisy crowds that can impact offenses and their ways and their abilities to make all these checks at the line of scrimmage. And because you don't have that, you've got 9 teams in the playoffs who scored 450 or more points this year. That's just ridiculous. I think that's a big part of why this year teams might be less apt to stray away from these track meets, because they're able to keep scoring up in a way that they wouldn't if there were a loud crowd screaming at them.
So what does KC want to do? What do the Chiefs want to do? I know they're not playing this weekend, but I'm interested in them because their defense ain't great, and they've been winning some nail-biters. And you've told me in the past they want to rely on Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the run more than they do on just the high-scoring game. What do you anticipate that Kansas City is going to do?
Now, Kansas City this year, when they had those track meet games, they're 5-1 of those this year, which is a much better record than they had the past couple of years, and they were a 500 team in those matchups. So I think part of it is that they're going to want to lean in that direction. I think they've got some trouble, though, too, because Edwards-Helaire has been hurt. I don't think Le'Veon Bell has the kind of breakaway ability. He hasn't had breakaway ability for a few years. They should never have relied on him for that sort of thing. But I still think they're going to want to try to get back to as much of the running game as possible, because they're last in the league in red zone defense. I mean, this is a team that they cannot afford to do that. Having said that, even if you're winning 70% of your games, as these teams are as a whole, even if you're expected to win 70% of your track meets, you get to 3 track meets in a row, you get a 1 in 3 chance of winning them. So I think Kansas City says we cannot afford to get in the 3 of these track meets in a row. We've got to slow things down. I still think they're not going to go maybe back to power like they did last year, but they're going to lean on it more than they have of late, because you're just not going to win these matchups against these powerhouse offenses.
So meantime, we have some interesting matchups this weekend. Obviously, none of them are going to involve Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers, and I'm hoping they meet in the Super Bowl. Who's actually the best quarterback who ever lived, right? I don't mean the most accomplished or the greatest, Tom Brady, Joe Montana. I mean, you put your eyeballs on them and you go, that guy. That guy's better than everyone else. The 2 best I've seen are Mahomes and Rodgers. I'd love to see them meet in the Super Bowl. But this first round does have some interesting matchups. A lot on the line for Lamar Jackson. And by the way, for Tannehill in that matchup, for Josh Allen and Phillip Rivers. When you survey the landscape this week, what game do you see where the underdog team is most likely to pull off the upset?
The underdog team is most likely to pull off the upset. I mean, I'm picking Seattle over the Rams easily. I'm picking Indy over Buffalo easily. The game I think is still going to be the closest is going to be Baltimore and Tennessee. The interesting thing is both of those teams, you think of powerhouse offense, you think of these high-scoring matchups, you think of these track meets, you don't think of teams that run the ball. But, I mean, Baltimore posted 3,000 yards now, rushing yards in 2 straight seasons, first time ever. Jackson's the first quarterback to ever post 1,000 rushing yards in 2 straight seasons. Derrick Henry's the first back to post 200 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in 5 games. These are 2 power-heavy teams, and their defenses are not handling the power run very well. So if I had to say which would be the most ripe for an upset, it would be that contest, because I think that's a toss-up matchup.
Hold on. Let's go back for a second. KC, did you give me another bum steer? First you told me about the Chiefs. They don't want the track meet, and I go run around talking about that. Oh, KC Joyner says they don't want to. And now you're saying, actually, they're 5-1 this year. So it's like it's changed already. And I know you're an empiricist, so events that occur in the facts, can change your mind. But now you're telling me you like the Colts easy over Buffalo or big over Buffalo, didn't you tell me teams from weak divisions, like, for example, the Colts, don't do much in the playoffs?
If I did say that for Indianapolis, no, I meant I do think Buffalo will win that contest. If I misspoke and said the Colts are going to win, that's on me. The Colts' problem is they have 2 turnovers.
You really threw me for a loop, boy. I was very confused, Casey. I also like Buffalo, as most people do there. I'm like, wait, the Colts big over the Bills? Okay, tell me about the Colts and the Bills.
The Colts and the Bills. The Colts, if they have 2 or more giveaways this year on offense, doesn't matter how many takeaways they get. If they give the ball away 2 or more times on offense, they're 2-4. They have 1 or fewer giveaways on offense, they're 9-1. Every time they get 2 turnovers on offense, they're going to have problems. I think Buffalo's racked up 2 or more takeaways 9 times this year, and they've done it in 5 of the past 8 games. Plus, the Bills, they're 5-1 in track meets this year, and the Colts are only 3-2. So if I'm looking at those factors, I'm pointing all those towards the Bills winning that contest.
Meantime, I talked about Lamar Jackson and the pressure on him earlier in the show, and you've gone over that game. We've gone over the Bills and the Colts, and I think there's a lot of pressure on Phillip Rivers, too. Obviously, Josh Allen, a top player this season, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think he's established himself. Phillip Rivers, 0 Super Bowls from the same draft class as Eli and Roethlisberger, who've both won multiple Super Bowls. But, of course, the biggest name in the playoffs, period, is Tom Brady and his high-flying Bucs team right now, which seem to be peaking right at the exact right moment. But I think, boy, talk about week 1 pressure. You can't lose to a 7-win team that's lucky to get to those 7 wins because, Doug Peterson pulls Jalen Hurts or goes, doesn't kick the field goal and then pulls Jalen Hurts. And as a result of this, you have 7 measly wins and no real quarterback to speak of, an old injured guy and a young guy you don't even have anymore because you didn't want him. What happens in Washington and Tampa this weekend?
Definitely. But here's the thing. The football team's allowed 20 or fewer points in 7 straight games. They allow a total of 111 points in that span. And they have 14 takeaways in the past 7 contests. And there was a time when Tampa Bay was having trouble. They had one span where they had, I believe it was 6 straight games with a turnover on offense, so a little giveaway. That was a problem for them. Thing is that you mentioned that they're peaking at the right time. They got that Week 13 bye. Couldn't have been more perfect for them because they're it's an aging team and they get a rest late in the year. They've only had 1 turnover on offense since then. They scored 23 or more points in all but 2 contests this year. And the football team hasn't scored more than 23 points since Week 12. They've got 9 giveaways over the past 4 weeks. You add that to the Alex Smith and Antonio Gibson injury issues, and plus even Terry McLaurin was injured late in the year. If you add all those together, the football team's just going to have trouble keeping up with this contest at all. So I think Tampa, even though it's a tough matchup, a tougher matchup than most people think, I think they're going to take this one handily.
Chase Young talking about he wants Tom Brady. He's going to get him. Chase Young is a stud at that position, especially given his age right now. The sky is the limit for him. Meantime, another aging quarterback who hasn't looked good in recent seasons, late in seasons, partly maybe because he was worn down, partly maybe because he didn't have a number 2 receiver, had a long rest from actually playing football. Of course, it was because of fractured ribs and a punctured lung. But Drew Brees now apparently is going to have Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, the number 2 receiver he's been missing, and Kamara, and a good defense. What do you think of the Saints matchup against the Bears, where Trubisky's played well late in the season, and that defense, of course, has the potential to be awesome in Chicago?
The thing about the Saints is that they get more production out of every facet of their roster than any team in the league. If you start to look at and take a look at the metrics of, okay, what do they produce here, and here, what do they get out of their second-string and third-string players, I think they get more production out of their roster than anybody in the league. That's their big plus. So they get their big guys back, makes them even more dangerous. Chicago's posted 30 more points and 380 more offensive yards in 4 straight games. Their rushing attack, they put up 100 more yards on the ground in 6 straight games. I think that's great. I think Trubisky being threatened with professional extinction, as it were, being sat on the bench, I think that motivated him. But Chicago's allowed 27 or more points in 4 of the past 6 games. I think their defense is nowhere near as strong as it was earlier this year. So I just think that this game might turn into one of those proverbial track meets we keep talking about, and I think the Saints are better suited for that. Having said that, they're only 4-3 in track meets this year, so Chicago may have a better chance than most people think.
real quick before I let you go, do you attribute the improved running game in Chicago just the offensive line playing together and coming together as the season wore on?
I think that's part of it, and also they finally got some production out of the passing game that made teams get away from the run. If all you can do is concentrate on stopping the run, you can stop the run pretty consistently. But if you have to start focusing on the pass more than it opens up the running lines, I really think that Trubisky's his willingness to be more aggressive and be more assertive once he came back into the lineup, I think that made a big difference to their ground game. And I think that, plus improved run blocking, but I think it's not just one factor, I think it's a combination.
KC Joyner, you can follow him at KC Joyner, the letters TFS, the football scientist, at KC Joyner, TFS. Joined us on the Goodyear hotline. Goodyear, helping you discover the road ahead. Goodyear, more driven. Thank you. Max Kellerman Show on ESPN Radio, ESPN Plus, the ESPN app, and SiriusXM Channel 80, and on your smart speaker. Talk about pressure. Who's under more in Tampa? Going to get to that in a second. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776, and give me your upset of Wildcard Weekend. The Max Kellerman Show is presented by Progressive Insurance.
Chase Young and the Washington football team are pumped for their NFC wildcard contest with Tampa. He was heard saying, "I want Tom."
He's a hell of a player. Yeah, we'll have our hands full, but it's one of those games where you better watch what you wish for.
If the Bucs don't make the Super Bowl, whose fault is it? And by the way, I realize I asked these questions and we're talking about sports. I'm not unaware of the events going on in this country right now, the insurrection in Washington, D.C. at the behest of President Trump, who, lost by 7 million votes and doesn't want to admit it. He's, what is it now? He's got how many more days left in office, and we hope that, or 13 or fewer days left in office if he's impeached or the 25th Amendment is used to remove him. But at any rate, in 13 days, he won't be there anymore. And the hope is that this is as bad as it gets, but this is someone who has known no bottom. The sinking gets lower and lower. So I'm aware that all this is going on, and yet you've tuned into a sports network, and this is a sports show. And even though it sometimes feels awkward, given what's going on, it is an escape, and we are talking sports. If the Bucs don't make the Super Bowl, who's that on? You know what? For me, it's not even the Super Bowl, to tell you the truth, because I don't care who you bring in. Year one, especially in a pandemic, you can't even really practice together, stuff like that. I'm not going to tell you, you must make the Super Bowl or it's a failure. But what would be a success for Tom Brady and the Bucs this year? Obviously, making the playoffs, they're supposed to. Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions to the tune of 112 points for the other teams last year, and they won 7 games. So you bring in Tom Brady, not to mention Gronkowski and Antonio Brown, for an ascending defense, with an ascending defense, and you'd expect at least, the over-under was 9.5 games. I figured 10. I took the over, and he won 11. What would be the equivalent of winning 11, right? Like a successful season. Because I'd say making the playoffs, you have to make the playoffs. Winning a playoff game, yep, you should win the playoff game. You should win a playoff game. I think doing that, you've done what people would say, okay, that's give or take. Anything less than that, not good enough. You can't lose in the first round. But I think in order to consider the season a success, they got to make the AFC Championship game. You can't just win a playoff game. And if they don't, who will take the blame? Look, largely the same guy who's going to get the credit for getting them there if they do, and he'll deserve the credit if he gets there, Tom Brady. Because he didn't simply play at kind of league average level, which is what I was expecting, actually. He played better than that. He played very well, especially as the season wore on. And remarkably well considering his age. Yes, I know he's in a great situation with all those weapons. He still played remarkably well. He'll get the credit if they get there, but if that Washington defense gets to him and Chase Young makes good on his promise to go get Brady, he's going to get the blame and he'll deserve it. By the way, I got to say, the Lakers are my pick in the NBA this year. But out west, there are 2 teams in the Mavs and the Suns who I have my eye on. And the Mavs have the Nuggets tonight. Nuggets are without Porter Jr., but of course, the Mavs are without Kristaps Porzingis. And those are two powerhouse Western Conference teams. The Mavs are a little under 500. They made changes to the starting lineup recently. Hardaway Jr. coming off the bench. Maxi Kleber in the starting unit with Willie Cauley-Stein. By the way, I really think when they're fully healthy, if the Mavs run out a starting five of Hardaway Jr. with Doncic and Kleber and Dorian Finney-Smith and Kristaps Porzingis, that might be the best starting five in basketball. Unless the best starting five in basketball is in Phoenix. Guys, Phoenix is 6-2 and tied with the Lakers right now. Phoenix, you know what that means? Because they went 8-0 in the bubble. They're 14-2 in their last 16 games. They're winning 8 games for every game they're losing. No, that's not right. 7 games for every game they're losing. 7-1. There's 7 wins for every loss recently. Their last 16 games. 14-2. And they got better in the offseason. They caught fire in the bubble, and Devin Booker took the next step as a player, looking like a little mini Kobe Bryant. And then they bring in Chris Paul. Like when you think about, as I said, that starting five, Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson are 2 excellent 3-and-D players. Like, it's one thing to be a player in name. In other words, the function of the player on this given team is to hit threes and play defense. But they don't hit threes so great. They just hit it well enough, and they defend pretty well, right? No, it's different when you say these guys can really stroke it from the outside and are lockdown defenders. They got some serious 3-and-D guys in Bridges and Johnson. And obviously, Chris Paul and Devin Booker, that's the best backcourt in basketball. The biggest question mark in the starting five is DeAndre Ayton, who's already a very good player, and Chris Paul should get the best out of him. Not to mention Jay Crowder, who they picked up, who's like the prototypical modern Swiss Army knife, can guard multiple positions and do multiple things on offense type player. Suns and the Mavs, man. I wanted to throw it out there because I've been meaning. It's funny because I have 2 hours on the radio every day to talk about the stuff I want to talk about. But a lot of time you get caught up in the news cycle, and I just don't get to talking about some of my pet subjects that I really want to put out there. And the Mavs and the Suns are 2 of them. Mavs only 3-4 right now, and they haven't won consecutive games all year. But if they beat the Nuggets tonight, they'll be 4-4, having won 2 in a row. And again, this is all without, by far, their second best player. 888-SAY-ESPN, Max Kellerman Show, presented by Progressive Insurance. Anthony in Florida, you're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio.
Hey, Max, I was just calling to give you my my hot take on whose fault it's going to be if the Bucs don't make it to the Super Bowl. Me being down in Tampa, season ticket holder, lifelong Bucs fan, it's got to be Bruce Arians' fault. I've been to multiple games this year. Ronald Jones, if he rushes over 12 attempts, he's almost a guaranteed lock to rush for 100 yards. Going into weeks 14 or 15 when he had COVID, he was the 4th leading rusher in the NFL with under maybe 150 carries for the season. You got to give that kid the rock. Open the play action up. Let Tom Brady work out of the play action. He's statistically the most accurate quarterback out of the play action this season. You got to run the rock like we did in 2002 when we won the Super Bowl. Go Bucs.
I think it's a good point. I think that one of the reasons you can get away from a run game if a guy gets COVID is because they're not the same for a while. But look, Tom Brady under pressure. It's funny when you say quarterbacks under pressure because it's like saying in boxing, the guy doesn't like it to the body. No one likes it to the body. No quarterback wants the pressure. Even the fast ones, right? Oh, it can open up a big play. You get pressure on a quarterback. That's good for your defense, bad for the quarterback. But Tom Brady, especially in recent years, it's really bad for him. And Washington does have the ability to get pressure on the quarterback without bringing extra guys. And Chase Young is, you have some young studs in the NFL who are pass rushers, right? The Bosa brothers. Those dudes are animals. Myles Garrett's a monster. You have some stud young pass rushers drafted 1st or 2nd in recent years. As an overall package long term, I might like Chase Young's upside the most. And the fact that he said, and even Arians, he's just, he respected it, he liked it almost, but he also admitted it gave them bulletin board material. They were talking about it in Tampa, what Chase Young had to say. This is, by the way, great wild card weekend, don't you think? All the games are very interesting. It's not the case every year where most of the playoff matchups you go, oh, wait a minute, Saints-Bears? Yeah, I want to see that. Bucks-Washington is the worst one, but yeah, I want to see that. I want to see Chase Young and Tom Brady. Yeah. Can Lamar do it? Or do the Titans beat him again? Phillip Rivers and Josh Allen. Can Rivers finally advance in the playoffs? In recent years, it hasn't been good for him. Big Ben is back in the playoffs, but not with familiar faces. PN app, Sirius XM Channel 80, and on your smart speaker. Time for your last take on Last Take. Hold on. Allow myself to introduce myself. Wait a minute. What? Oh, time for your take on Last Take. You can reach me at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776.
You heard First Take?
At least it's good to hear your voice finally, because I know on First Take, I only hear you on the intro and outro.
Now hear Max's Last Take.
By the way, Ben Roethlisberger, is guiding this young Steelers player through the playoff whirlwind, right? Last time Pittsburgh was in the playoffs, the Killer Bees were there with Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. Now only one playoff start among its receivers and backs on that team. They got their work cut out for them. I know Stefanski's not going to be there. I think that's of all the games I've talked about, I really haven't spent time today on that one. I think the Browns actually have a much better chance at an upset than people realize. Lee in Idaho, you're on the Max Kellerman Show, ESPN Radio. What is your last take?
You know what? First and foremost, Max, I just want to say, I know I have to get to my thing, but I appreciate what you do. You are my hero, and I want to grow up and be like you. And going into this, I was talking about the Mavericks. Do you really think when Kristaps Porzingis gets better, they're going to be that much better? I find them they're 3-4 right now, and I know they're missing a key piece, but do you think that they're going to really push the Lakers?
Oh, yeah. I think the Mavericks, if you look at last year's playoffs, and I know Seth Curry is now Jason Richardson on that team, but Richardson is an excellent defender and a good enough shooter, right? But they have plenty of offense, and Kristaps at 7'3", the things he can do offensively and defensively, they were better than the Clippers. I think they would have beaten the Clippers, who I picked to win the whole thing last year, in under 7 games if Porzingis stays healthy. And by the way, one of those losses was total BS. Porzingis was whistle was blown on one end of the court, one was missed on the other end of the court, and then he was ejected unfairly. They would have won that game too. That's when the Clippers took off, when Porzingis was out of the game. He totally changed the other team's offense. And again, the starting 5 is as good as Hardaway Jr. with Doncic and Kleba and Dorian Finney-Smith and Kristaps Porzingis is tough, really tough. I absolutely think he makes that kind of difference, yes. Scott in Colorado, you're on the Max Kellerman Show.
Yeah, we are hearing Watson might want out. So I'm wondering, as a Bronco fan, what would it take? I was thinking Drew Lock, their first-round pick, Von Miller, and wide receiver Tim Patrick, plus maybe next year's first-round pick.
I don't think you're going to get Deshaun Watson. He just, he signed his deal. Look, here's the truth of the matter. If you're the Denver Broncos, let me tell you what I would give for Deshaun Watson. My whole team. I would rather start a team, if I had 2 options, just Deshaun Watson and no one else on the team, and I have to figure it out through unsigned free agents and draft picks and whatever else I could muster, or the team I have now, no Deshaun Watson, I think I'd rather start with Deshaun Watson. So, if the question is, would you trade X, Y, or Z, the only thing I wouldn't give up is, forever future first-round picks, because you got to build your team through the draft. But what you have now in terms of actual players, yes, there's no combination of players I wouldn't trade for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was just about as good as anyone over the second half of the season. He was amazing over the second half of the season. Goff is practicing, and McVay still hasn't named the starter, L.A. What? Wolford got cut by the Jets, right? On and off of practice squads around the league. You won't commit to Jared Goff if he's healthy? What is going on with the Rams? You look at the Rams and say, why can't they win the Super Bowl right now if Goff can at least play above average quarterback? He's practicing and has not been named the starter. Oof. Keep our eye on this tomorrow. By the way, speaking of which, NFL Whip Around is tomorrow. Some good games to start it off. Until then, Shanae Golick Jr. coming up right